It's a 4-kilometer site. It has about 80 mausoleums, but it also has canopies, it has enclosures, and it has open loose graves. What has been hand counted is about 150,000 graves, of which there's a mixture of these 4 typologies. They say, mythology says, that there's probably about 500,000 graves that were here once upon a time, but over time, over the centuries, they've eroded. Sometimes the stone has been stolen, sometimes it's just disappeared because of the air. Welcome to the world of Cube Edutours. I am architect Zain Mustafa, and this is an initiative that I started about 8 years ago. Today we are here at Makli Necropolis. It is the largest necropolis for kings and saints. It is a spiritual sanctuary, and it is a very, very special place for me personally, because this is where the entire project began once upon a time. What we will be looking at today are not only the 4 different typologies of structures here, the mausoleums, the canopies, the platforms and the open graves with their intricate carvings, some calligraphic, some geometric, but we will also be looking at the quality of the rock used. If you look at the quality of the stone used in the khanqa here, you will find that it has a lot of air erosion. And actually up close you will also find fossilized little bits of white, chalky limestone fragments in it. What that shows us is that some of these pieces, some of the rock came from closer areas, came from places closer to the riverbed. The river runs right in front of us. One of the tributaries of the Indus used to be right here. It's now a dry riverbed with Thatta on the other side. But the stone quality tells us a lot about the patron, about the person who's either buried there or who funded it. So we're going to be looking at either really soft stone like the stone used in the madrasa around me, or much harder, denser, finer stone where the calligraphy is also lasted as we go down towards the Tarkans and the Mughals. We are standing right now in the Sama cluster where the Sama rulers are buried. We will move towards the Arghuns, the Tarkans and eventually the Mughals. While we talk about the different kinds of stone and the quality of stone, whether it was imported or whether it was from a local supplier or local quarry, one must also keep in mind that there was a lot of lime plaster used in many of these buildings. Behind me is the mosque, the Jam Masjid, in front of which we were just looking at the khanqa. If you look at this facade, it has the plinth with the stone, then it has the brick, and then it has this white chalky material that has turned black in some areas. This is the lime plaster that is a classic material and process used for construction technology. This building was in the 14th century. In about that time, there was a lot of buildings that used this finish as its plaster. If you look at it up close, it's very, very dense, and it's actually stronger than concrete many times. But over the centuries, it oxidizes and it turns black. So many of these buildings in Makli would have been either the yellow sandstone, so they would have glowed in gold. You would see the pink brick, or they would be glowing again in their white facades. So this is one of those examples where we get to see the lime plaster in its original form. This is one of the canopies. The canopies are really interesting at Makli because they try to imitate a dome structure. But we realize when we're looking at some of the earlier constructions at Makli that the engineers, the builders, the craftsmen were brought most likely from Gujarat. They weren't people who actually understood the Islamic architecture of canopy building. If you look at where we're sitting right now in this canopy, you pillars, they're very short, they're squat, they have geometric patterns on it, they don't have any figurative elements, but they're very much inspired by Jain and Hindu temples from the other side, from the Gujarat side and even maybe further east. That's where the karigars, where the craftsmen were coming to build this for the Sama rulers. As you go up and look at the capitals, you see how the weight gets even stronger, they get heavier. This is not typical Islamic architectural style. But by looking at the language of the architecture, we get to understand who these people were, where were they coming from, and what may have been niches on the base of the pillars would have been potentially where there would have been reliefs of the deities, which we've had to remove. Obviously, they removed them because they wanted to construct in the Islamic style. So they've retained and maintained the geometric patterns and taken all the figurative elements out. Also on the dome, what is meant to be the dome is actually a structure which is called corbelling. This is not a true dome. It gives you the curvature. I mean, if you look at this from the outside, it's not a pure curve because they hadn't figured out how to do dome architecture. Not only did the Samas not know how to do it, they didn't have the knowledge with them. The craftsmen that they brought, one assumes by looking at this, also didn't know the same way of, didn't know how to do it. So they created these corbelling systems which has the pinwheel, and the assumption is that when you take it out, the rest of the structure will collapse. As we go further down from the 14th century to the 16th to the 17th, we get closer to the Mughal rulers, where they had absolutely perfected the geometry of the circle and the square, the squinching, the springing of the dome. Those domes still exist, they haven't broken, and they are perfect. But here we get to see the initial footprint of the Sama rulers, the initial footprint of Makli as a necropolis, and that the craftsmen came from Gujarat, that would have been the closest neighboring area where they had typologies of funerary architecture to be inspired by and bring the language across. So now we're standing in front of the world famous facade of Jam Nizamuddin. This is a picture facade that you will see in millions of posters, photos, videos, books worldwide. Is this intricate masterpiece of really a Baroque style. Everybody looks at it and there's a jaw-dropping wow factor. It has an awesomeness that comes to it naturally. It was built in 1509. The two or three things that we look at when we're studying this building is what was happening in terms of trade. Trade has played a very important role in where we're getting the design. So as we discussed earlier, some of the construction technology was borrowed from neighboring people, neighboring lands, neighboring countries. The craftsmen came from neighboring countries as well. So did some of the materials. Jam Nizamuddin's facade is fascinating because although it's in one type of stone and it's an excellent quality stone, it has no wind that we can see. It's got the carving is extremely intricate. So the tools they were using must have been very, very refined and very sharp to be able to give you this kind of work centuries later. The interesting thing is, if you look closely right behind me, in each of those niches, in each of those patterns, in each of those floral sections, many of them, one doesn't match the other. And if we were to color code all the mismatched pieces, like a mood board on this facade behind me, it would actually end up becoming a very, very colorful facade. One doesn't realize that because it's this monochromatic stone structure, it's a box, it sits very solidly on its base, and it is majestic and it's gorgeous. But in fact, it's extremely colorful. And at the time that it was built, we're talking about the end of the Renaissance, we're talking of the Baroque period. And this is a very Baroque style on the front where they didn't decide on one pattern, they didn't decide on one motif, on one design. They used as many as they could, whatever somebody brought to them, whatever someone suggested. And it was his son who built this for his father. So it makes sense that he wanted to keep all his ministers, all the people who loved his father, who ruled for 50+ years. He wanted to keep them all happy. And it seems to many of us that this facade is a reflection of the son not only paying homage to his father, but also due respect to all the people who loved his father while he was alive. It is an extremely colorful facade and must be looked at very, very carefully. How we look at buildings, how we look at typologies, how we analyze, deconstruct, and see the semiotic language between all of these periods, the eras, the trades, and the resulting buildings is one of the things we do in our journeys at Edutours. And that's how we start looking at buildings like the Jam Nizamuddin Mausoleum in all of its beauty and grace. While we are mesmerized up and down and across the facade that I was just talking about for Jam Nizamuddin's main building, if you follow me around the corner and come to this, it's really wonderful to see how the facade actually is barnacled onto the rest of the building. And the wonderful thing is, right here, if you follow these edges and follow my eyes, you will see that there is a resolution that's been left incomplete right up here and all the way along this edge, where the front has literally looks like it's just been stuck on. And all the way along the top, there's this incredibly ornate facade that comes along a very, very minimalist and modern side section. But it's not been resolved, and this is what one starts talking about and trying to figure out where the resolution has gone. Is it because of restoration? Is it because we lost these styles? Or was it done in a hurry back in the day and they didn't finish it? Was it copied, borrowed, inspired from somewhere else and attached to the rest of the building? These are the mysteries of Jam Nizamuddin that over time one can study and find answers to. As we walk past the facade of Jam Nizamuddin's mausoleum is one of the most famous in the world. It is the one that attracts a lot of attention for tourists, historians, archaeologists, art students, architects. And we're looking at all the motifs along the edge of the facade. Many of them don't even follow the same pattern. They change. It's almost like a mood board for different types of styles, for different types of designs, all along the facade. It has this dynamic, this beautiful, lyrical feature that is really, really wonderful to study. There is no other place in the world where you can get 400 years of architectural history in one spot, in a straight line, as the crow flies, while we're standing here looking at it. And here is what would have been one of the reasons why it was built here. It would have been a lush green environment. This is one of the tributaries of the river Indus. All of this would have been flooded water that comes down, bends into the lagoon over here, and then follows all the way down the edge of what is today's Makli. Across from us is the town of Thatta. Thatta was known for its universities back in the day. Some say 3,000, some say many more. The British historians that wrote about Thatta said it was an extremely cultured, extremely civilized, extremely wealthy in terms of education and educational institutions kind of city. So imagine this lush green park that's the necropolis. So one of the buildings in the Sama cluster that often get left behind because it's on one side and it looks like it has traditional Islamic proportions. It's got the 3 gaz sections on the front. It's a 7-section facade with the door in the middle. So it's got 3 on one side, 3 on the other, and the central door. So it's 7 pieces. Each of them has the vertical articulation that shows where the gaz ends. But I like coming into this building because if you look at the corners, like the corner behind me or the corner in front of me, there is definitely an attempt to create that movement of 2 sections of 2 squares on top of each other to start creating the spring for the squinching. But unfortunately, the design here is just a mere plastering. There's no real structural squinching happening. And as you look further up, there's again been a really lovely artistic attempt at creating a dome, but you can see that the architects and engineers for this building were just mimicking silhouettes and shapes of what they've seen Islamic architecture to do, and the dome didn't stay, it fell through because the herringbone zigzag of the bricks was an innovative, creative way that they were trying to solve the dome architecture moving forward from the corbelling of the canopy. And you can see quite clearly that it hasn't worked, but it does make for a gorgeous design on the roof, even though it's falling apart and it's ruins. On the inside, we get to see what the attempt for the structure was. Unfortunately, it didn't last. Now that we're done with the Sama cluster, we're going to be heading south. And our journey today, in any case, is from north to south. Our first step on the next section of this journey is going to be one of the enclosures. We haven't seen an enclosure or a platform yet, so you will be introduced to one in the next step. It's not far from us. In fact, it's right here. It's a yellow sandstone boundary walls that we can see behind me. We're going to get into one of the buggies at Makli and go and take a look at one of these spectacular graves of the Tarkans.